The smoke alarm's piercing shriek cut through my dreams at 3:47 a.m., dragging me from sleep like a fishhook through water. For a split second, I thought it was just another false alarm triggered by my neighbor's late-night cooking experiments. The acrid smell hit me next, sharp and wrong. Nothing like burnt toast or overheated oil. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if the story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. I shot upright in my queen-size bed, my heart already hammering against my ribs. The air in my bedroom felt thick, heavy with something that made my throat burn. Through the gap under my door, I could see an orange glow flickering like candlelight, but brighter, angrier. My name is Rachel Morrison, and I've lived in the same two-story craftsman house in Millbrook, Oregon for 8 years. It's a quiet neighborhood where the biggest excitement usually comes from Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning roses or the annual block party barbecue. The kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and kids ride bikes until streetlights flicker on. That Tuesday night in October, I was supposed to be celebrating. My graphic design business had just landed its biggest client yet, a tech startup that wanted a complete rebrand. I'd worked until midnight, tweaking logos and color schemes at my kitchen table, riding the high of creative breakthroughs. The house had been perfectly quiet when I finally climbed the stairs to bed, my cat Whiskers already curled up on his favorite armchair downstairs. Now, as I stumbled toward my bedroom door, that same house felt like a stranger's. The hardwood floors that I'd refinished myself last spring were warm beneath my bare feet. Too warm. When I pressed my palm against the door, the wood felt like it had been sitting in summer sunshine, not the cool October air that should have filled my home. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hand shaking as I dialed 911. The operator's voice came through calm and professional, asking questions I could barely process. Where was the fire? Was I safe? Could I get out? Her words felt distant, like she was speaking through water while my world burned around me. "Second floor bedroom," I managed to choke out, moving toward my window. "I can smell smoke. I think it's in my house." The operator stayed on the line, guiding me through each step. "Don't open the door if it's hot. Check the window. Feel for heat. Stay low to avoid smoke inhalation." My bedroom window faced the backyard, overlooking the small garden where I had planted tomatoes and herbs that spring. The glass was cool under my fingers as I fumbled with the old-fashioned window locks, the kind that required a specific twist and pull that I'd practiced countless times during Oregon's Fire Safety Month. The October air rushed in, clean and sharp against my face, carrying the scent of damp leaves and approaching winter. But when I leaned out to look toward the front of the house, my stomach dropped. Orange light danced across my neighbor's windows, reflecting flames I couldn't see but knew were there. The careful life I'd built, the sanctuary I'd created after my divorce 2 years ago, was being devoured while I watched helplessly from above. The fire department arrived with sirens that seemed to wake the entire neighborhood. From my window perch, I could see lights flickering on in houses up and down Maple Street. People emerged onto their porches in bathrobes and slippers, some with phones raised to capture the chaos. The red and white lights of emergency vehicles painted everything in stark, shifting colors. Captain Mike Torres, a stocky man with kind eyes and 23 years of firefighting experience, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and led me to the ambulance. The paramedics checked my vitals while he asked gentle questions about the house layout, whether I had working smoke detectors, if I'd noticed anything unusual before going to bed. "Started in your home office," he told me an hour later, his helmet tucked under his arm. "Looks like an electrical issue, maybe an overloaded circuit or faulty wiring. The good news is we caught it before it spread to the second floor. You're lucky that the smoke alarm woke you when it did." Lucky. The word felt hollow as I stared at my house. The front windows were blown out, black scorch marks reaching up the white siding like grasping fingers. The porch where I'd spent summer mornings drinking coffee and reading novels was charred and skeletal. The home office where I'd built my business from scratch was a gutted shell. But I was alive. And that was what mattered. Or at least that's what I told myself as dawn broke over the smoking remains of my sanctuary, painting the October sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed obscenely beautiful after such destruction. The fire chief handed me a business card and a report number, explaining that an investigator would contact me within 48 hours. Standard procedure, he assured me, for all structure fires. Insurance companies required detailed reports, photographs, witness statements. The machinery of recovery was already grinding into motion while the ashes were still warm. Standing there on Maple Street in borrowed clothes from my neighbor Linda, watching the firefighters roll up their hoses and pack their equipment, I had no idea that this was just the beginning, that the real fire wouldn't be the one that consumed my house, but the one that would consume my family when they discovered what they had done while my world burned down around me. The Red Cross volunteer, a gentle woman named Susan with silver hair and kind hands, drove me to a nearby motel as the sun climbed higher over Millbrook. The Pineview Inn wasn't much to look at, but it had clean sheets and a working phone. As I sat on the edge of the scratchy bedspread, still wearing Linda's borrowed sweater, I knew I had to make the calls I'd been dreading. My family wasn't the type you'd call in a crisis, at least not anymore. Growing up in Salem, Oregon, the Morrison household had been all about appearances and expectations. My father, David Morrison, built his dental practice on the principle that image mattered more than authenticity. My mother, Patricia, perfected the art of social climbing through charity galas and country club memberships. They'd raised 3 daughters to be extensions of their ambitions. My older sister Stephanie had followed the script perfectly, marrying her college boyfriend Marcus right after graduation and producing 2 beautiful children who attended private school in Portland. She worked part-time at an upscale boutique, the kind of job that sounded impressive at dinner parties without requiring real commitment. My younger sister Ashley had taken a different path, but one that still impressed our parents. She'd moved to Los Angeles after college, landing a job at a talent agency that represented reality TV stars and social media influencers. She lived in a glossy apartment in West Hollywood and dated men who drove expensive cars and wore designer watches. Then there was me, the middle daughter who disappointed everyone by choosing passion over prestige. After my divorce from Richard, a financial planner our parents had adored, I'd moved to Millbrook to start over. I'd bought the Craftsman house with my settlement money and launched Morrison Design from my home office, building a client base one small business at a time. My parents viewed my career choice as a phase, something I'd eventually outgrow when I came to my senses and remarried appropriately. They'd stopped asking about my business after the first year, instead filling our phone conversations with updates about Stephanie's children and Ashley's glamorous life in California. I dialed my mother's number first, knowing she'd be having her morning coffee and checking her calendar for the day's activities. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice bright with the artificial cheer she reserved for charity committee calls. "Rachel, darling, how lovely to hear from you. I was just telling Mrs. Whitman about your little design hobby at the book club yesterday." She paused, and I could hear her flipping through papers. "Is everything all right? You sound strange." "Mom, there was a fire at my house last night. I'm okay, but the damage is pretty extensive. I'm staying at a motel while the insurance company figures things out." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had shifted into crisis management mode, the tone she used when someone committed a social blunder at one of her events. "Oh my goodness, Rachel, how absolutely dreadful. Are you injured? Do you need us to come down?" But even as she asked, I could hear the calculation in her voice, the mental juggling of schedules and obligations. "I'm fine, just shaken up. The fire department says it was electrical, probably from my home office." I twisted the motel's thin blanket between my fingers. "I mainly wanted to let you know what happened before you heard it somewhere else." Of course, of course. Your father will be so upset. We'll have to see what we can do." She paused again, and I heard her husband's voice in the background. "David says to make sure you call your insurance company right away. These things can be terribly complicated if you don't handle them properly." We talked for a few more minutes, my mother asking practical questions about smoke damage and whether I had somewhere to stay. She didn't offer their guest room in Salem, but I hadn't expected her to. Physical proximity had never been her way of showing care. The call to Stephanie went better, at least initially. She gasped appropriately when I told her about the fire, asked worried questions about my safety, and promised to call our mother with updates so I wouldn't have to repeat the story multiple times. Oh, Rachel, how terrifying. I can't imagine waking up to something like that.
Her voice carried genuine concern, the kind of warmth that reminded me why we'd been close as children. "Do you need anything? I could drive down this weekend and help you sort through things." It was a generous offer, especially considering her packed schedule with the kids' activities and Marcus's work events. Stephanie had always been the responsible one, the sister who remembered birthdays and sent thoughtful gifts. I appreciate that, but I think I need to wait for the insurance adjuster first, see what's salvageable and what isn't. I stared out the motel window at the parking lot, where a family was loading suitcases into their minivan. "I'll keep you posted on how things develop." Ashley's response was characteristically dramatic when I reached her that afternoon. She was between meetings at the agency, talking to me from her car while stuck in Los Angeles traffic. "Oh my God, Rachel, that's like something out of a movie. Are you totally devastated? I would be absolutely destroyed if something happened to my apartment." She paused, and I could hear her car radio playing soft pop music. "This is going to sound terrible, but did you get any pictures? I know a photographer who specializes in disaster documentation. He might be able to help with your insurance claim."
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. It was such a quintessentially Ashley response, turning tragedy into opportunity, that I almost laughed. She meant well, in her own way. In her world of influencers and manufactured drama, everything was content. Everything had an angle. "I think the fire department has plenty of photos for the insurance company," I told her, "but thanks for thinking of it." What none of them mentioned, what didn't come up in any of those careful, concerned phone calls, was the trip they'd been planning for months. Stephanie had let it slip during our last family dinner in August, a long weekend getaway to celebrate our parents' 35th anniversary. They'd rented a beach house in Cannon Beach, a sprawling place with ocean views and enough bedrooms for everyone. Ashley was flying in from Los Angeles, Marcus was taking time off from his law firm, and even the kids were getting excused from school for the extended weekend. The dates were October 15th through 18th. I knew because Stephanie had mentioned it twice, once when she was trying to coordinate schedules, and again when she was planning the menu for their anniversary dinner. October 15th, the same day my house caught fire. As I sat in that sterile motel room, processing the day's conversations and trying to plan my next steps, I had no idea that my family was 2 hours away, toasting my parents' marriage while my home office smoldered. I had no idea that Stephanie's concerned phone call had come from the beach house kitchen, or that Ashley had been sitting in her rental car outside a Cannon Beach art gallery when she expressed her shock at my tragedy. I wouldn't learn any of this until 3 days later, when the insurance adjuster asked me a simple question that would unravel everything I thought I knew about the people who were supposed to love me most. 3 days after the fire, I was sitting in the Pineview Inn's cramped lobby, nursing my 4th cup of their bitter coffee and trying to make sense of insurance paperwork, when a woman in a navy blazer walked through the glass doors. She had the kind of purposeful stride that suggested she'd done this hundreds of times before, her leather briefcase swinging with practiced efficiency. "Miss Morrison, I'm Detective Janet Kellerman with Pacific Northwest Insurance Investigations." She extended a firm handshake, her gray eyes already scanning my face with the intensity of someone trained to read people. "I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, but I need to walk through some details about your claim." I'd been expecting this call since Captain Torres mentioned the investigation process, but something about Detective Kellerman's presence made my stomach tighten. She wasn't just an insurance adjuster. She was someone who investigated fraud, someone who looked for lies where others saw tragedy. We drove to my house in her unmarked sedan, the October morning crisp and clear in a way that felt almost mocking after the chaos of Tuesday night. Maple Street looked different in daylight, the neighbors' houses seeming to lean away from mine, as if afraid the destruction might be contagious. My home stood like a wounded animal, the front facade blackened and hollow-eyed where windows used to be. Yellow caution tape fluttered from the porch posts, and the smell of burnt wood and melted plastic still hung heavy in the air. Detective Kellerman pulled on latex gloves and handed me a pair, her movements precise and professional.
Tell me about Tuesday night, she said, stepping carefully over the threshold into what used to be my living room. Start from when you went to bed and walk me through every detail you remember. I recounted the evening, from working late on the tech startup's logo designs to being jolted awake by the smoke alarm. She listened without interruption, occasionally making notes in a small pad she pulled from her jacket pocket. Her questions were specific and probing. You said you worked until midnight. What were you using for lighting in your office? Just my desk lamp and the computer screen. I never turned on the overhead lights when I was working late. Too harsh. Any electrical devices plugged in that weren't normally there? Phone chargers, space heaters, anything unusual? I shook my head, following her into the gutted remains of my home office. The damage was worse than I'd realized from the outside. My computer was a melted hulk. The desk I'd refinished from a garage sale find was nothing but charred splinters. The filing cabinet where I kept client contracts had warped from the heat, its drawers permanently fused shut. Detective Kellerman crouched near where my desk had been, examining something with a small flashlight. The fire started here, near this outlet. Electrical fires usually leave specific patterns. She pointed to scorch marks on the wall that meant nothing to me, but seemed to tell her a story. Was this a new outlet? Had you done any electrical work recently? No, nothing like that. The house had a full inspection when I bought it 8 years ago. The electrician said everything was up to code. She made another note, then stood up and dusted off her knees. Let's talk about your family situation. Are you married? Children? Anyone else who has access to the house?
Divorced 2 years ago. No children. I live alone except for my cat. The mention of Whiskers sent a fresh wave of panic through me. Oh God, my cat. I haven't seen him since the fire. Is he... Animal control found a gray tabby hiding under the neighbor's porch Wednesday morning. He's at the Millbrook Animal Shelter, waiting for you to pick him up. Her expression softened slightly. Smoke inhalation, but he's going to be fine. Relief flooded through me so intensely that I had to lean against the doorframe. Whiskers was alive. At least one thing had survived this disaster intact. Detective Kellerman continued her methodical examination, photographing everything from multiple angles. She paid particular attention to the electrical panel in the basement, which had suffered significant damage but was still partially intact. Your policy covers up to $300,000 in structural damage and $100,000 in personal property, she said, consulting a tablet she'd pulled from her briefcase. That's a substantial claim. Walk me through your recent financial situation. Any major debts, business struggles, anything that might affect your ability to maintain the property? The question felt invasive, but I understood why she had to ask. Business has actually been good lately. I just landed my biggest client ever, a tech startup that wants a complete rebrand. The contract is worth more than I usually make in 6 months. Congratulations. That must have been a relief. She typed something into her tablet. When did you sign that contract? Monday afternoon. The day before the fire. I watched her eyebrows raise slightly. I know how that sounds, but it's just a coincidence. I've been building toward clients like this for 2 years. We spent another hour going through the house, room by room. My bedroom had suffered smoke damage, but was structurally intact. The kitchen would need to be completely rebuilt. The living room's hardwood floors were warped beyond repair, and the ceiling had partially collapsed. Back at the motel, Detective Kellerman spread her preliminary paperwork across the small table near the window. The forms were dense with technical language and codes that meant nothing to me, but her explanation was straightforward. Initial findings suggest an electrical malfunction in your home office, possibly caused by an overloaded circuit or faulty wiring. The good news is that there's no evidence of accelerants or intentional ignition. This appears to be accidental. Relief washed over me so intensely that I had to lean against the doorframe. So the claim will be approved. That's not my call to make. I just gather evidence and present my findings to the underwriting team. She closed her briefcase with a decisive snap.
But I do have one more question, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Something in her tone made me sit up straighter. This wasn't routine anymore. Where was your family Tuesday night? Parents, siblings, anyone who might have known about your work schedule or had access to the house? The question hit me like cold water. My family doesn't have keys to my house, and they live in Salem, Portland, and Los Angeles. Why would that matter? Detective Kellerman pulled out her phone and showed me a photograph. It was a screenshot from some kind of social media post. The image showed 4 people raising champagne glasses on what appeared to be a restaurant deck with ocean waves visible in the background. The timestamp read October 15th, 11:47 p.m. My blood turned to ice. The faces in the photo were unmistakable. My parents, Stephanie, and Ashley, all smiling at the camera with the kind of carefree joy that comes from perfect vacation moments. One of your neighbors mentioned seeing your sister's car in your driveway Monday evening. Another neighbor saw someone matching your father's description near your house Tuesday afternoon. Detective Kellerman's voice was carefully neutral. This photo was posted to Instagram by your sister Ashley at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday night, about 8 hours after your house caught fire. I stared at the photo, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. They were at the beach house. They were celebrating while my home burned. But more than that, they'd been in Millbrook on Monday and Tuesday, close enough to... Ms. Morrison, I need to ask you directly. Did any member of your family have a reason to want your house destroyed? Are you aware of any insurance policies or financial arrangements that might benefit from this fire? The room seemed to tilt around me. No, that's impossible. They would never... Why would they want to hurt me? But even as I said it, fragments of memory were clicking together like puzzle pieces. Ashley's questions about my insurance coverage during our last family dinner, Stephanie's casual inquiries about my mortgage balance, my mother's comments about how I was wasting my inheritance money on the house renovations.
Detective Kellerman leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. Ms. Morrison, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about property damage anymore. If someone in your family had prior knowledge of this fire, if they were involved in any way, we're looking at a potential case of arson and insurance fraud. That's a federal crime. The words hit me like physical blows. Arson, insurance fraud, federal crime? My family, the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, were now suspects in the destruction of my life? I need you to compile a list, Detective Kellerman continued, pulling out a business card. Everyone who knew your work schedule, anyone who had access to your house, any recent conversations about insurance or finances. And I need you to think very carefully about whether anyone in your family has been under financial pressure lately. As she packed up her materials and prepared to leave, one final question escaped my lips, barely above a whisper. Do you really think they could have done this? Detective Kellerman paused at the door, her expression unreadable. In 30 years of investigating insurance fraud, I've learned that people will do terrible things for money, even to the people they claim to love. After she left, I sat alone in that sterile motel room, staring at the business card in my trembling hands. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about their concern and support after the fire, was crumbling like ash. The real fire was just beginning to burn. The Millbrook Animal Shelter smelled like disinfectant and hope, a strange combination that somehow felt comforting after days of smoke and suspicion. Whiskers meowed pitifully from his carrier as we drove back to the motel, his gray fur still smelling faintly of smoke despite the shelter's attempts to clean him up.
Having him back felt like reclaiming a piece of my old life, even though everything else had changed. I'd moved from the Pineview Inn to a furnished apartment above Miller's hardware store on Main Street. It wasn't much, just a studio with slanted ceilings and a kitchenette that barely qualified as functional, but it had two crucial advantages. It was affordable long-term, and it had reliable internet. If I was going to investigate my own family, I needed to be strategic about it. My first stop was social media, something I'd largely avoided since my divorce. But Ashley's Instagram photo opened a door I couldn't close. Ashley's account was a carefully curated highlight reel of Los Angeles glamour, but scrolling back through October revealed more than she'd probably intended to share. There was the beach house rental confirmation screenshot she'd posted with the caption, "Anniversary weekend planning complete," dated September 22nd. A photo of her packing designer luggage tagged Oregon bound from October 14th. And then, buried in her Instagram stories, a short video of Stephanie's kids building sandcastles with the timestamp showing 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday. 2:47 p.m. on Tuesday? Less than 13 hours before my house caught fire. I screenshotted everything, creating a digital folder that grew heavier with each piece of evidence. Stephanie's Facebook was more family-focused, full of school events and soccer games, but her check-ins told their own story. Cannon Beach on October 14th, Haystack Rock on October 15th, a restaurant called The Wayfarer at 8:30 p.m. Tuesday night, just hours after my 911 call. But it was my mother's activity that made my stomach turn. Patricia Morrison wasn't one for social media oversharing, but her friend Margaret Whitman had tagged her in multiple photos from the anniversary celebration. There was my mother, radiant in a cream-colored sweater, cutting into an elaborate cake while my father beamed beside her. The timestamp? October 15th, 10:23 p.m. My house had been burning for 6 hours by then. I called Detective Kellerman with my findings, meeting her at a coffee shop called The Daily Grind, where the barista knew everyone's order by heart. She studied my phone screen with professional interest, taking notes in her precise handwriting. "This establishes a timeline and location, which is helpful," she said, ordering a black coffee that matched her no-nonsense demeanor. "But we need more than social media posts to build a case. Tell me about your family's financial situation. Any recent changes, pressures, unusual expenses?" That's when I remembered the conversation from August, the last family dinner we'd shared at my parents' country club. Ashley had been complaining about her Los Angeles rent, how the agency wasn't paying her enough to maintain her lifestyle. Stephanie had mentioned Marcus's law firm going through restructuring, which I'd assumed meant budget cuts. Even my parents had seemed subdued when the dinner bill arrived, my father making an uncharacteristic comment about tightening belts in uncertain times. "My father's dental practice has been struggling," I told Detective Kellerman. She made more notes. "What about your house specifically? Have any of them ever commented on its value, insurance coverage, anything like that?" The memories came flooding back with uncomfortable clarity. Ashley asking during our last phone call why I'd increased my homeowner's insurance coverage. Stephanie wondering aloud why I'd chosen such an expensive policy for just a little house in the middle of nowhere. My mother's repeated suggestions that I should sell and move back to Salem where I could find a nice man and settle down properly.
But the conversation that really haunted me had happened in June, during a rare visit to my parents' house. I'd been showing them photos of my latest renovation project, the home office where I'd built custom shelving for my design books and client files. My father had studied the pictures with unusual interest. "That's a lot of electrical equipment in one room," he'd said. "Computers, printers, photography lights. Hope your wiring can handle the load. At the time, I'd thought he was being protective, maybe even showing genuine interest in my work. Now, the comment felt sinister, like he'd been cataloging vulnerabilities. Detective Kellerman leaned back in her chair, processing the information. I need you to do something that's going to be difficult. I need you to have normal conversations with your family members, but pay attention to their responses. Ask casual questions about the timing of their trip, what they did each day, where they were when they heard about the fire. You want me to investigate my own family? I want you to listen carefully to what they tell you. People who are hiding something often reveal more than they intend to. She handed me a small device that looked like a pen. This is a digital recorder. It's legal to record conversations you're part of in Oregon, but only use it if you feel safe doing so. That evening, I called Stephanie first. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm with the kind of maternal concern that made me feel guilty for suspecting her. Rachel, how are you holding up? I've been thinking about you constantly since the fire. The kids have been asking about Aunt Rachel's house, wondering if you're okay. I'm managing. Whiskers is safe, and I found a temporary place to stay. I activated the recorder, hating myself for the deception. I keep thinking about that night, trying to remember if I missed any warning signs. When did you first hear about what happened? There was a pause, so brief I might have imagined it. You called me Wednesday morning, remember? You were at that motel, sounding so shaken up. I felt terrible that I couldn't drive down immediately to help. Right, Wednesday morning. I'm still a bit fuzzy on the timeline. This whole week has been such a blur. What were you doing Tuesday night when it was happening? Another pause. Longer this time. Tuesday night. Oh, we were at the beach house for Mom and Dad's anniversary. Actually, we just finished dinner at this lovely restaurant overlooking the ocean. I remember because Ashley was taking photos of the sunset, and I was thinking how perfect the timing was for Mom and Dad's celebration. The lie was so smooth, so naturally delivered, that for a moment I almost believed her. But I had screenshots of Ashley's Instagram posts showing they'd been at the beach all day, not just arriving for dinner. That sounds wonderful. I'm glad they had such a nice time. My voice sounded normal to my own ears, but inside I was screaming. Did Ashley fly in specially for the weekend? Oh yes, she took time off work and everything. Flew on Monday afternoon and we drove straight to the coast. We wanted to make the most of the long weekend. Stephanie's voice carried that particular warmth she used when talking about family togetherness. It's so rare that we're all together anymore. Monday afternoon, but Detective Kellerman had neighbor witnesses placing family members near my house Monday evening and Tuesday afternoon. The timeline didn't match, and Stephanie had to know that. After we hung up, I sat in my tiny apartment, staring at the recorder. My sister, the one who'd been my closest ally growing up, had just lied to me about her whereabouts during the most traumatic event of my life. Either she was protecting someone else, or she was directly involved in whatever had happened to my house. I called Ashley next, dreading what I might discover, but knowing I had to follow through. Her phone went straight to voicemail twice before she finally answered. Traffic noise in the background, suggesting she was driving. Rachel, I was just thinking about you. How's the insurance situation going? Are they taking care of everything? I'm still working through the paperwork. It's a slow process. I chose my words carefully. I keep replaying Tuesday night, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Were you already at the beach house when I called Wednesday morning? Yeah, we'd been there since Monday. The whole anniversary weekend was so perfectly planned. We spent Tuesday exploring tide pools and taking photos on the beach. Mom was in such a good mood, and Dad actually relaxed for once. Ashley's voice carried that particular fondness she used when talking about family togetherness. I felt so bad when I got your call the next morning. There we were, having this perfect family moment, and you were dealing with something so terrible all alone. The contradiction was stark. Her Instagram clearly showed her posting from the beach at specific times that conflicted with the neighbor sightings in Millbrook. But more than that, her emotional response felt performative, like she was telling me what she thought I wanted to hear rather than expressing genuine concern. By the time I'd finished both calls, my hands were shaking. The people I'd trusted most in the world were lying to me about the night my life fell apart.
Whatever they'd done, whatever role they'd played in the fire, they were covering it up with a coordination that suggested careful planning. I uploaded the recordings to my laptop and sent copies to Detective Kellerman, along with a detailed summary of the contradictions I'd identified. As I prepared for bed, Whiskers curled up beside me on the narrow daybed, I realized I was no longer just investigating a house fire. I was uncovering a conspiracy that went to the heart of my family, and I had no idea how deep it went or how far they'd be willing to go to protect their secret. Detective Kellerman's call came at 6:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, jolting me awake in my studio apartment above Miller's Hardware. Whiskers protested from his perch on the windowsill as I fumbled for my phone, still groggy from another restless night of questions and suspicions. "Ms. Morrison, we need to meet. Today. I've got new information that changes everything." Her voice carried an urgency that made my stomach drop. "Can you be at the sheriff's office in an hour?" The Millbrook County Sheriff's Office occupied a low brick building on Elm Street, sandwiched between a medical clinic and a tax preparation service. Detective Kellerman was waiting in a conference room lined with filing cabinets and motivational posters, her laptop open and surrounded by manila folders that seemed to multiply each time I saw her. "Sit down," she said, gesturing to a metal chair across from her. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to process, but I need you to stay calm and think clearly." She turned her laptop toward me, revealing what appeared to be financial records and bank statements. "We obtained warrants to examine your family's recent financial activity. Your father's dental practice is in serious trouble. He's 3 months behind on equipment loans, owes $47,000 in back taxes, and his business account has been overdrawn 6 times since August." The numbers swam before my eyes as she pointed to highlighted entries. "Your sister Stephanie's husband Marcus was laid off from his law firm 2 months ago, but they haven't reduced any of their expenses. Private school tuition, country club membership, luxury car payments. They're bleeding money they don't have." She clicked to another screen showing credit card statements. "Ashley's been living on advances from her talent agency for months. She owes $23,000 in credit card debt, and her rent in Los Angeles is 4 months overdue. Her landlord filed an eviction notice on October 10th. The revelation hit me like cold water. 5 days before the fire, Ashley was facing homelessness. But she always posts about expensive restaurants and shopping trips. Social media lies, Miss Morrison. She's been maintaining an image she can't afford." Detective Kellerman pulled out a thick folder. "But here's where it gets interesting. 3 weeks before your fire, your father took out a $50,000 life insurance policy on you, listing himself as the beneficiary." My blood turned to ice. "What?" "He used his medical credentials to justify the policy, claiming you'd requested it for estate planning purposes. The insurance company didn't question it because you're his daughter and he's a licensed professional." She slid the policy documents across the table. "Did you know about this?" I stared at my own name on the paperwork, my hands shaking as I read the fine print. "I never requested this. I never even talked to him about life insurance." "That's what I suspected." Detective Kellerman's expression was grim. "But it gets worse. We found correspondence between your mother and a private investigator in Salem. She hired him to research your daily routines, work schedule, and security habits." She showed me printed emails that made my skin crawl. The private investigator, someone named Carl Hendricks, had been watching me for weeks. He knew I worked late most Tuesday nights. He knew I lived alone. He knew my neighbors' schedules and which houses would be empty on weeknight evenings. Your mother paid him $2,500 for what she called family security assessment, but his report reads like a blueprint for when you'd be most vulnerable. The conference room seemed to spin around me. They were planning to kill me? We don't have proof of murder conspiracy yet, but the insurance policy, the surveillance, the coordinated alibis, this wasn't opportunistic. This was planned. She leaned forward, her gray eyes intense. "The fire was supposed to kill you, Rachel. When it didn't, they had to improvise." She pulled out another set of documents. "Your family's been in contact with a legal firm in Portland, discussing how to contest your insurance claim. They're planning to argue that you set the fire yourself for insurance fraud, which would void your policy and potentially leave you facing criminal charges." The betrayal was so complete, so calculated, that I couldn't process it. My own family hadn't just watched my house burn, they'd planned my death, and were now trying to destroy what remained of my life. "There's more," Detective Kellerman said softly. "We found the murder weapon."
She opened an evidence bag containing a small electronic device I didn't recognize. "This is a remote-controlled electrical overload device. It was hidden behind your home office outlet, designed to cause a catastrophic electrical fire. Very sophisticated, very expensive, and very traceable. Where did they get something like that? We're still investigating, but the serial number leads back to a security company in Portland that specializes in corporate sabotage prevention. Someone with technical knowledge and significant resources acquired this device specifically to target your home. My mind raced through possibilities. Marcus had connections in the legal and corporate world. Ashley worked with people who had access to all kinds of specialized equipment. Even my father had relationships with medical device companies that might overlap with security technology. Detective Kellerman's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the message with satisfaction. Perfect timing. My partner just finished interviewing the private investigator. Carl Hendricks is willing to cooperate in exchange for immunity. He's got recordings of his conversations with your mother. She queued up an audio file on her laptop, and suddenly my mother's voice filled the conference room. The cultured, charity gala tone I'd known all my life was discussing my potential death with chilling casualness. Tuesday nights are ideal because she works late and the neighbors are usually asleep by 11. The electrical fire needs to look accidental, something that would happen naturally in an older house with outdated wiring. Another voice, presumably Hendricks, asked about timing. What if she wakes up and escapes? Then we go to Plan B, my mother replied without hesitation. She's been depressed since her divorce, struggling financially with her little art business. Suicide wouldn't surprise anyone who knows her situation. The recording continued for 12 more minutes, laying out contingency plans that included planting evidence of depression and financial desperation in my apartment, coaching family members on their statements to police, and even preparing fake suicide notes written in my handwriting that my mother had somehow obtained samples of. I ran to the conference room small bathroom and vomited until nothing was left but bile and horror. My mother, the woman who taught me to ride a bicycle and helped me pick out my prom dress, had been planning not just my death but my posthumous destruction. When I returned to the table, Detective Kellerman had prepared another revelation. We also found evidence of their backup plan. If the fire and murder didn't work, they were prepared to frame you for insurance fraud. They've been documenting your spending habits, photographing your living situation, and building a case that you were desperate enough to burn down your own house. She showed me photographs taken with telephoto lenses, me working late in my office, me carrying groceries into my house, me meeting with clients at coffee shops. Someone had been stalking me for weeks, turning my ordinary life into evidence for a case they planned to build against me. Your sister Ashley was the photographer. She flew into Portland multiple times over the past 2 months, rented cars under false names, and conducted surveillance on you while posting fake location updates from Los Angeles. The Instagram posts I discovered were more than just lies. They were deliberate misdirection designed to create alibis, while Ashley was actually in Oregon documenting my life for their conspiracy. But here's what saved you, Detective Kellerman continued. Their plan had one fatal flaw. They assumed the fire would kill you quickly, before you could escape. When you survived and called 911, it created a timeline they couldn't control. The emergency response documented everything: the fire's point of origin, the electrical device, even the fact that you were clearly a victim rather than a perpetrator. She pulled out a timeline chart showing how my survival had disrupted their carefully orchestrated plan. They had to shift from murder cover-up to insurance fraud accusation, but they didn't have time to plant all their evidence. Plus, their celebration at the beach house was documented on social media before they knew you'd survived. My phone rang, interrupting the devastating briefing. The caller ID showed my father's number, and Detective Kellerman nodded encouragingly. Answer it. Let's see what he has to say now that we've uncovered their plan. I put the call on speaker, my hands trembling as I heard my father's familiar voice. Rachel, sweetheart, I've been thinking about your situation. Your mother and I want to help you through this difficult time. We think you should come stay with us while you sort out the insurance issues. Family should stick together during crises. The irony was so brutal I almost laughed. The man who'd taken out a life insurance policy on me was now offering shelter, probably so they could complete their plan away from the scrutiny of the investigation. That's very generous, Dad, I managed to say, my voice steadier than I felt. But I'm managing okay on my own for now.
Nonsense. You're clearly under tremendous stress. Your mother's worried you might do something rash. We've all noticed how depressed you've seemed lately. Detective Kellerman raised her eyebrows at this obvious attempt to establish a suicide narrative. My father was still working their backup plan, trying to paint me as mentally unstable even as the investigation closed in around them. I appreciate the concern, but I'm working with professionals to handle everything properly, I said carefully. There was a pause, and when my father spoke again, his voice had shifted subtly. What kind of professionals? You haven't hired lawyers, have you? That would be unnecessarily expensive, and frankly, it might make you look guilty of something. The threat was veiled, but unmistakable. Even now, knowing I was alive and investigating, they were trying to manipulate me into vulnerable positions. After I hung up, Detective Kellerman began packing up her files. We have enough evidence to make arrests, but I want to give you a choice about timing. We can move now and risk them destroying additional evidence, or we can wait a few more days and try to catch them in the act of implementing their fraud accusations. I thought about my father's call, the casual way he'd suggested I might harm myself, the cold calculation behind my mother's recorded voice. How much danger am I in right now? Considerable. They're desperate, and desperate people make dangerous decisions. If they realize how much we've uncovered, they might try to expedite their backup plan. She handed me a small device. This is a panic button. If you feel threatened in any way, press it and we'll have units to your location within minutes. As I left the sheriff's office that afternoon, the weight of the evidence felt crushing. My family hadn't just betrayed me, they'd planned my murder with the same attention to detail that my mother applied to her charity galas. And now that their plan had failed, they were still hunting me, still scheming to destroy what remained of my life. But I wasn't the same naive woman who'd answered their concerned phone calls a week ago. I was becoming someone else, someone harder and more dangerous than they'd anticipated. And I was about to make sure they paid for every lie, every betrayal, every moment they'd spent planning my death while pretending to love me. The sting operation was Detective Kellerman's idea, but I was the one who had to make it work. We'd set it up like a chess game, with each move calculated to expose my family's true intentions while keeping me safe from their increasingly desperate attempts to control the narrative. Remember, your goal is to get them to admit their involvement, Detective Kellerman explained, as technicians fitted me with recording equipment so small it looked like jewelry. Don't push too hard, let them hang themselves with their own words. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. I would call a family meeting, claiming I needed their support to deal with mounting pressure from the insurance investigation. The meeting would take place at my parents' house in Salem, their comfort zone, where they'd feel confident and in control. What they wouldn't know was that unmarked surveillance vehicles would be positioned throughout their neighborhood, and every word would be recorded. I drove to Salem on a gray November morning, the kind of Pacific Northwest day that made everything look washed out and dreary. My parents' house stood like a monument to suburban success, its manicured lawn and pristine paint job broadcasting respectability to anyone who cared to judge. I'd grown up in this house, celebrated birthdays and holidays here, but now it felt like approaching a fortress held by enemies. Stephanie's minivan was already in the driveway when I arrived, along with a rental car that probably belonged to Ashley. My entire family had gathered for what they thought would be my surrender, my plea for help navigating the mess they'd created. My mother answered the door wearing her best concerned parent expression, the one she'd perfected for parent-teacher conferences and charity committee meetings. "Rachel, darling, you look so thin. This whole ordeal has been terrible for you." She ushered me into the living room, where my father sat in his leather recliner, reading glasses perched on his nose as he studied what appeared to be legal documents. Stephanie was curled up on the sofa with a cup of tea, looking maternal and worried. Ashley paced by the window, her nervous energy filling the room like static electricity. "We're so glad you called," my father said, setting down his papers with deliberate care. "Your mother and I have been discussing your situation, and we think it's time for some tough love." I sat down across from them, my hands folded in my lap to hide their trembling. The recording device felt heavy against my chest, a secret weight that reminded me I wasn't as defenseless as they believed. The insurance company is asking a lot of questions. They seem to think there's something suspicious about the fire. Ashley stopped pacing and turned toward me, her face a mask of fake sympathy. That's ridiculous. Anyone can see it was an accident. You're not responsible for faulty wiring. But they keep asking about my finances, my work schedule, whether anyone had access to the house. They even asked about our family relationships.
My parents exchanged a glance that didn't escape my notice. It was the kind of wordless communication that came from decades of marriage and shared secrets. Insurance companies always look for ways to avoid paying claims, my mother said smoothly. It's a standard business practice. Don't let them intimidate you. My father leaned forward, his expression shifting into the authoritative mode he'd used when I was a child. Rachel, I think it's time you considered the possibility that you might need legal representation. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because you're clearly in over your head. I can't afford a lawyer, Dad. Between losing my job and the temporary housing costs, I'm barely staying afloat. Which is exactly why we think you should move back home, Stephanie interjected. At least until this gets resolved, you shouldn't be dealing with this alone. The offer sounded genuine, laden with sisterly concern, but I knew it was a trap. Getting me under their roof would give them control over my communications, my movements, my access to outside help. I don't want to be a burden, I said, playing the role they expected. Don't be silly, my mother replied. Family takes care of family. That's what we do. Ashley finally sat down, choosing the chair closest to me. Actually, I've been thinking about your situation, and I wonder if the insurance company might be right to be suspicious. The room went dead silent. Even my parents looked startled by Ashley's directness. What do you mean? I asked, though I could feel the trap closing around me. Well, think about it from their perspective, Ashley continued, her voice taking on the persuasive tone she'd learned in Los Angeles. Young woman, recent divorce, struggling business, living alone in an isolated house. The fire starts in your home office, right where all your expensive equipment was plugged in. My father nodded slowly, as if considering this perspective for the first time. She has a point. It does look suspicious when you lay it out like that. But I would never, I started to protest. Of course you wouldn't, Stephanie interrupted, but perception matters in legal situations. The insurance company doesn't know you like we do. My mother stood up and moved to the window, her back to the room. There's something else we need to discuss. Rachel, we've been getting calls from reporters. Someone leaked information about the investigation to the press. This was news to me, and genuinely alarming. What kind of information? They're asking about your mental state since the divorce, your financial situation, whether you've seemed depressed or desperate lately. My father's voice carried a weight that felt like a threat. We've been protecting you by refusing to comment, but that can't continue indefinitely. Ashley pulled out her phone and showed me a news article I hadn't seen. The headline read, Local woman under investigation for insurance fraud after suspicious house fire. My photo from my business website was prominently displayed, making me look like a criminal. This is a nightmare, I whispered, and for once my emotion was completely genuine. It doesn't have to be, my mother said, turning back to face me. If you're proactive about getting help, if you acknowledge that you've been under tremendous stress and made some poor decisions, people will be more sympathetic. The room felt like it was closing in around me. They were systematically destroying my reputation while positioning themselves as my reluctant saviors. What kind of poor decisions? I asked. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Rachel, we know about the financial pressure you've been under. The business loans, the credit card debt, the mortgage payments you've been struggling with. But I didn't have business loans or credit card debt. My mortgage was current and my business was thriving. They were describing someone else's financial situation or creating a fictional narrative to support their fraud allegations. I don't understand, I said, letting confusion color my voice. Stephanie leaned forward with a manila folder I hadn't noticed before.
We hired someone to help us understand your situation better, a financial counselor who specializes in crisis intervention. She handed me documents that made my blood run cold. Bank statements, credit reports, loan applications, all bearing my name and social security number, but describing a financial disaster that wasn't mine. Someone had created an elaborate false financial history designed to make me look desperate enough to commit insurance fraud. "These aren't my accounts," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm.
Rachel, denial isn't going to help you, my mother said gently. We know you've been struggling to maintain your independence, trying to prove you could make it on your own after the divorce, but pride goes before a fall. Ashley nodded sympathetically. The important thing now is damage control. If you admit you made a mistake, show that you're getting help for your depression and financial problems, the prosecutor might be willing to negotiate a plea deal. A plea deal. They weren't just framing me for insurance fraud, they were preparing me to confess to it. But I didn't commit fraud, I said, letting desperation creep into my voice. I didn't set the fire. My father's expression hardened. Rachel, we found the accelerant in your garage. The lie was delivered so smoothly, with such conviction, that for a moment I doubted my own memory. But I knew there was no accelerant, because I hadn't set any fire. That's impossible, I said. Is it? Ashley pulled out her phone again, showing me photos of what appeared to be my garage. In the images, there were containers of gasoline and what looked like fire-starting materials arranged on my workbench. I took these pictures when I visited last month. But Ashley hadn't visited last month. She'd been in Los Angeles, posting constantly on social media. These photos were either doctored or taken during one of her secret surveillance trips to Oregon. The insurance investigator is going to find these materials, Stephanie said softly. When they do, your situation is going to get much worse. My mother returned to her chair, her face arranged in an expression of maternal disappointment. We've talked to a lawyer, Rachel, a good one, who specializes in white-collar crime. He says if you're proactive about accepting responsibility, you might avoid prison time. The web they had woven was masterful in its completeness. Fake financial records, planted evidence, manufactured witness statements, and now legal advice designed to convince me to confess to crimes I hadn't committed. They'd thought of everything, except the possibility that I might have discovered their plan. What do you think I should do? I asked, playing my role to the end. Come home, my father said firmly. Let us take care of you while you work through this. We'll get you the help you need, financial counseling, therapy, legal representation, but you have to trust us and stop fighting the inevitable. The trap was fully revealed now. They wanted me isolated and dependent, cut off from outside resources while they helped me navigate toward a confession that would solve all their problems. I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text message. Detective Kellerman's signal that the surveillance team was ready to move in. I need to think about this, I said, standing up carefully. It's a lot to process. Of course, my mother said, also rising. But don't take too long, darling. Every day you wait makes the situation more difficult to manage. As I moved toward the door, my father called after me, Rachel, we love you, no matter what you've done. No matter how bad this gets, you're still our daughter. Remember that. The words should have been comforting, but delivered in the context of their elaborate conspiracy, they felt like a final manipulation. Love as a weapon, family as a trap. I walked to my car slowly, aware that they were watching from the window. As I drove away from the house where I'd grown up, I pressed the button on my recording device that would signal Detective Kellerman to begin the arrests. 20 minutes later, as I sat in a Salem coffee shop waiting for confirmation, my phone rang with news that felt like justice finally arriving. My parents, Stephanie, and Ashley were all in custody, charged with conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and a dozen other felonies that would ensure they spent years in prison.
The family that had planned my death while toasting their anniversary was finally facing consequences for that calculated betrayal. But as satisfying as their arrests felt, I knew the real work of rebuilding my life was just beginning.
6 months after the arrests, I stood in the doorway of my rebuilt home office, watching morning sunlight stream through new windows onto freshly installed hardwood floors. The insurance settlement had been substantial once the investigation cleared me of all wrongdoing, and I'd used every penny to not just restore my house, but to transform it into something stronger than what came before. The trial had been a media sensation that stretched across 3 months of testimony, evidence presentation, and revelations that shocked even the prosecutors. My family's conspiracy went deeper than anyone had initially suspected. The private investigator, Carl Henrichs, revealed under oath that this wasn't their first attempt at insurance fraud. They'd successfully staged a burglary at Stephanie's house 2 years earlier, netting $75,000 in claims for jewelry that had never actually been stolen. Ashley's financial desperation had driven her to multiple fraudulent schemes, including identity theft and credit card scams that funded her lavish Los Angeles lifestyle. The talent agency had fired her months before the fire, but she'd continued pretending to work there while actually running cons on wannabe influencers. My parents' dental practice bankruptcy had been orchestrated deliberately, hiding assets in offshore accounts while claiming poverty to avoid tax obligations. The life insurance policy on me was just the latest in a series of illegal financial maneuvers designed to maintain their country club image, while their real wealth evaporated through poor investments and gambling debts my father had hidden for years. During the trial, I sat in the gallery watching these people I'd once called family transform from the concerned relatives who'd offered me shelter into cold-eyed criminals who showed no remorse for planning my murder. The contrast was so stark, it felt like watching a documentary about strangers. The most chilling moment came when the prosecutor played my mother's recorded conversation with the private investigator, the one where she discussed contingency plans, including my staged suicide. In the courtroom, she sat perfectly composed, her hands folded in her lap, showing no emotion as her own voice described methods for making my death look self-inflicted. When the verdicts came down, they were swift and decisive. My father received 15 years for a conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. My mother got 12 years for her role in planning and financing the conspiracy. Stephanie was sentenced to 8 years for her participation in the surveillance and evidence planting, and Ashley received 10 years for fraud, identity theft, and her central role in the murder plot's execution. The judge, the Honorable Catherine Wells, delivered her sentencing with words that still echo in my memory. This court has rarely seen such a calculated betrayal of family bonds. The defendants didn't just conspire to commit murder for financial gain. They spent months psychologically torturing their victim while pretending to offer love and support. But the trial was just the legal resolution. The real work of rebuilding my life had started long before the verdicts were read. Detective Kellerman became an unexpected ally in that process. After the arrests, she'd helped me navigate the complex web of financial fraud my family had woven around my identity. Cleaning up the fake credit reports and fraudulent accounts took months of paperwork and legal challenges, but she guided me through each step with the same methodical thoroughness she'd applied to the investigation. "You've got something most people don't," she told me during one of our coffee meetings at the Daily Grind. "You've seen the absolute worst that people can do, and you survived it. That kind of strength doesn't just disappear." She was right. But it took time to recognize that strength in myself. For weeks after the arrests, I'd found myself questioning every relationship, wondering if other people in my life were hiding similar betrayals. Trust, once broken so completely, doesn't heal overnight. The rebuilding process became literally and metaphorically therapeutic. I hired a contractor named Miguel Santos, a quiet man in his 50s who'd built half the custom homes in Millbrook. Together, we redesigned my house with security and peace of mind as primary concerns.
The new home office featured reinforced doors, a security system that connected directly to the sheriff's department, and electrical work that exceeded every safety code by wide margins. But more importantly, it felt like mine in a way the original space never had. Every choice, from the paint colors to the furniture arrangement, was made by someone who'd learned to trust her own judgment above all else. My business, Morrison Design, not only survived the scandal, but thrived because of it. The media attention had been brutal during the investigation, but once my innocence was established, potential clients saw someone who'd overcome extraordinary adversity. The tech startup that had hired me just before the fire became my biggest advocate, referring other companies and helping me expand into corporate consulting. I hired my first employee, a recent design school graduate named Emma Chen, who brought fresh perspectives and boundless enthusiasm to projects I might have approached with post-trauma caution. Watching her excitement about design challenges reminded me why I'd chosen this career in the first place, helping me reconnect with creative joy that the conspiracy had temporarily stolen. The house became a gathering place for the real family I was building. Linda, my neighbor who'd provided clothes and comfort the night of the fire, became a weekly dinner companion. Captain Torres and several firefighters from that night stopped by occasionally, checking on my progress and sharing stories that helped me process the trauma with people who understood crisis response.
Dr. Sarah Martinez, the therapist I'd started seeing during the trial, helped me navigate the complex emotions of grieving family members who were still alive but lost to me forever. "You're mourning the family you thought you had," she explained during one particularly difficult session. "That's a unique kind of loss that requires its own healing process." The therapy sessions weren't just about processing betrayal. They were about learning to recognize healthy relationships and set boundaries that protected the life I was rebuilding. I learned to distinguish between people who offered genuine support and those who were drawn to my story for less healthy reasons. Some of the trial media coverage had turned me into a minor celebrity, the woman who'd outsmarted her own family's murder plot. I received interview requests from true crime podcasts, invitations to speak at conferences about family dynamics and financial fraud, even offers to write a book about my experience. I turned down most of these opportunities, choosing instead to share my story selectively and only when it might help others recognize similar warning signs in their own lives. I spoke at a few domestic violence awareness events and fraud prevention seminars, always emphasizing that betrayal can come from unexpected sources and that trusting your instincts matters more than maintaining family peace. The financial settlement from the insurance company, combined with restitution ordered by the court, provided security I'd never had before. But more valuable than the money was the clarity it brought about what really mattered. I'd learned to distinguish between people who enhanced my life and those who drained it, between obligations that served genuine purposes and those that existed only to maintain harmful traditions. Whiskers, my cat, who'd survived the fire by hiding under the neighbor's porch, became something of a local celebrity himself. Children in the neighborhood would stop by to pet the brave kitty who survived the fire, and he basked in the attention with typical feline grace. His presence reminded me daily that survival wasn't just about enduring trauma, it was about finding ways to thrive afterward. A year after the fire, I hosted a dinner party in my rebuilt home. The guests included Detective Kellerman and her husband, Captain Torres and his family, Linda and her teenage daughter, Miguel, the contractor, and his wife, Emma from my design team, and Dr. Martinez. It was a chosen family built from shared experiences, mutual respect, and genuine care. As we sat around my new dining room table, sharing stories and laughter, I realized that my family's conspiracy had accomplished something they never intended. It forced me to identify what authentic love and support actually looked like, freed me from obligation-based relationships that drained my energy, and shown me the difference between people who wanted to control my story and those who celebrated my strength. The fire that was meant to end my life had instead burned away everything false and harmful, leaving space for something real and beautiful to grow. I'd lost the family I was born into,
but I'd gained the wisdom to build relationships based on choice rather than biology, respect rather than obligation, and love that didn't come with hidden agendas. Standing in my garden on warm summer evenings, watering tomatoes and herbs that thrived in soil enriched by ash from the fire, I understood that some destruction creates space for better things to grow. My family had tried to erase me from existence, but instead, they'd helped me discover who I really was when everything false was stripped away. The woman who emerged from that experience was stronger, wiser, and more genuinely happy than the one who'd answered their concerned phone calls from a motel room 6 months earlier. They'd planned my destruction, but I'd chosen my resurrection, and that choice made all the difference. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.
2 years had passed since the verdicts were delivered, and I was preparing for a conversation I'd never thought would happen. The Oregon Department of Corrections had contacted me about my mother's request for a victim impact meeting. After 18 months of appeals and legal maneuvering, she was finally facing the reality of her lengthy sentence and apparently wanted to speak with me. The meeting would be held at Coffee Creek Correctional Facility, a women's prison 2 hours south of Millbrook. Dr. Martinez and I had spent weeks discussing whether this confrontation would be healing or harmful, ultimately deciding that I was strong enough to face whatever Patricia Morrison had to say. The drive through the Willamette Valley on that crisp autumn morning felt surreal. Rolling hills covered in wine grapes and Christmas tree farms stretched toward distant mountains, the kind of Pacific Northwest scenery that graced postcards and tourism brochures. It seemed wrong that such beauty could coexist with the institutional gray walls that soon came into view. The prison's visiting room was everything I'd expected and nothing I'd prepared for. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows on plastic furniture bolted to linoleum floors. Families clustered around small tables, their conversations hushed but intense, creating a soundtrack of whispered hopes and broken promises. My mother appeared exactly 18 minutes after the scheduled time, escorted by a guard who pointed her toward my table with practiced efficiency. The woman who approached bore little resemblance to the charity gala hostess I remembered. Prison had stripped away the careful makeup, designer clothing, and salon-perfect hair that had been her armor in the outside world. She wore standard-issue clothing that hung loosely on a frame that seemed diminished, aged beyond her 63 years. But her eyes remained sharp, calculating, still searching for angles and advantages, even in this controlled environment. "Rachel," she said, settling into the plastic chair across from me, "you look well." The observation felt clinical, as if she were evaluating my appearance for some hidden purpose. I'd deliberately chosen simple clothing and minimal makeup, wanting to present myself as the successful woman I'd become, rather than the victim she'd tried to create. "Thank you for agreeing to see me," she continued when I didn't respond immediately. "I know this must be difficult." Her tone carried the same measured warmth she'd used when addressing charity committee members, but something underneath felt different, less assured, more desperate. "You requested this meeting," I said simply. "What did you want to discuss?" She leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on the table between us. "I want you to understand that everything we did came from a place of love." The statement was so audacious, so completely disconnected from reality, that I almost laughed. Planning my murder came from love? "You were throwing your life away," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Living in that isolated house, wasting your education on some artistic hobby, refusing to remarry and build a proper family. We watched you destroying yourself slowly, and we couldn't bear it."
I studied her face as she spoke, searching for any sign of genuine remorse or recognition of the horror she'd inflicted. Instead, I saw the same self-righteous conviction that had driven her to hire private investigators and plan contingency murders. "So you decided to speed up the process?" I asked. "We thought—" She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "We thought that if you survived a traumatic event, it might shock you into making better choices. The fire was meant to destroy your office, your business equipment, force you to come home and accept our help." It was a breathtaking revision of history, transforming attempted murder into tough love gone wrong. But I'd learned to recognize her manipulation tactics, and this felt like another calculated performance. The insurance investigator found a remote-controlled device designed to cause a catastrophic electrical fire. That wasn't meant to scare me into better choices. That was meant to kill me. Her composure cracked slightly, revealing something raw and angry underneath. "You were always stubborn. Even as a child, you refused to listen to guidance from people who knew better." The shift from fake remorse to blame was so swift it felt like whiplash. This was the real Patricia Morrison, the woman who'd spent months planning my death because I'd refused to live according to her specifications. The life insurance policy had your father listed as the beneficiary. $50,000 payable upon my death. How does that fit into your concern for my well-being? She was quiet for several minutes, her fingers drumming against the table in a rhythm I remembered from childhood. It was something she did when calculating her next move, weighing options for maximum advantage. "The policy was a precaution," she finally said. "We knew you were struggling financially, making poor decisions. If something happened to you, we wanted to ensure your debts wouldn't burden the family."
But I'd seen the application paperwork during the trial. The policy had been purchased 3 weeks before the fire, with a specific clause that would pay double for accidental death. My father had lied about my financial situation to justify the coverage, creating a paper trail that suggested I was desperate enough to take dangerous risks. "You hired someone to spy on me for weeks?" I said. "You documented my routines, my schedule, my neighbors' patterns. That level of surveillance doesn't match your story about spontaneous concern." Her mask slipped further, revealing the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath her society matron facade. "You forced our hand, Rachel. Year after year, watching you waste your potential, embarrass the family with your bohemian lifestyle. We tried patience, we tried reasoning, we tried financial pressure. Nothing worked." Financial pressure. She was referring to the credit card applications they'd submitted in my name, the fraudulent loans that had damaged my credit score, the mysterious bills for services I'd never received. They'd been sabotaging my finances for months, creating artificial desperation to justify their intervention. And when subtle pressure didn't work, you escalated to murder? It wasn't supposed to be murder. The words exploded from her with enough force to attract attention from nearby tables. She lowered her voice, but the intensity remained. "You forced our hand, Rachel. Year after year, watching you waste your potential, embarrass the family with your bohemian lifestyle. We tried patience. We tried reasoning. We tried financial pressure. Nothing worked." But I'd heard the recorded conversations, the detailed discussions of contingency plans that included staging my suicide if the fire didn't kill me quickly enough. There had been no escape scenario, no dramatic rescue that would drive me into their arms. They'd planned my death with the same thoroughness they applied to wedding planning and charity fundraisers. The fake financial records, the planted evidence in my garage, the media leaks painting me as mentally unstable.
Those were backup plans for when I survived, weren't they? If you couldn't kill me, you'd destroy my reputation and freedom instead. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The pretense of maternal concern finally fell away completely, revealing the predator who'd spent years planning to eliminate an inconvenient daughter. "You have no idea what it's like," she said quietly, "to watch your child choose failure over success, isolation over family, stubbornness over wisdom. Every choice you made was a rejection of everything we'd taught you, everything we'd sacrificed to give you." The admission was more honest than anything she'd said since sitting down, but it confirmed what I'd suspected throughout the trial. This had never been about love or concern for my well-being. It had been about control, about their inability to accept that I'd chosen a different path than the one they'd designed for me. "So you decided to eliminate the problem," I said. "We decided to save you from yourself," she corrected, "even if you were too foolish to appreciate the intervention." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, but nothing she said approached genuine remorse or accountability. Instead, she offered variations on the same theme. I forced their hand through my poor choices. They acted from noble motives that I was too selfish to understand, and my survival had been an unfortunate complication rather than their intended outcome. When visiting time ended, she made one final attempt at manipulation. "I hope someday you'll understand that everything we did came from love. Parents sometimes have to make difficult decisions for their children's benefit." I stood up slowly, looking down at this woman who'd given birth to me, but had never truly been a mother. "Patricia," I said, using her first name deliberately, "love doesn't purchase life insurance policies on the people it claims to protect. Love doesn't hire private investigators to document vulnerabilities. Love doesn't plan contingency murders." As I walked toward the exit, she called after me, "You'll regret this stubborn attitude when you're older, Rachel, when you're alone and realize what you've thrown away." But I wasn't alone. I was returning to a life filled with people who celebrated my strength rather than trying to control it, who supported my choices even when they didn't understand them, who showed love through respect rather than manipulation. The drive home through that same beautiful valley felt different than the morning journey. The weight of uncertainty I'd carried for 2 years was finally lifting. I'd needed to look Patricia Morrison in the eye one last time, to confirm that the woman who'd raised me was truly gone, and the predator who'd tried to kill me was all that remained. Dr. Martinez had prepared me for the possibility that this meeting might not provide closure, that some questions would remain unanswered, and some wounds would never fully heal. But what I found instead was clarity. The last threads connecting me to my biological family had finally been severed, leaving space for the chosen family I'd built to flourish without the shadow of obligation or guilt. That evening, I called Emma to tell her about a new project I wanted to pursue. Morrison Design would be expanding into victim advocacy consulting, helping people rebuild their lives after traumatic betrayals. The work would combine my design skills with the hard-won wisdom I'd gained from my own experience, creating spaces where survivors could heal and thrive.
The business expansion would require additional staff, new office space, and partnerships with legal and therapeutic professionals who understood the complex needs of trauma survivors. It felt like the perfect evolution of what Morrison Design had always been about, creating spaces where people could build authentic lives free from others' harmful expectations. 3 months later, I stood in the newly renovated Victim Advocacy Center, watching Emma train our first group of volunteer coordinators. The space combined practical resources with beautiful design, creating an environment that honored both the severity of our clients' experiences and their capacity for healing and growth. Detective Kellerman had agreed to serve on our advisory board, bringing a law enforcement perspective to our trauma-informed approach. Captain Torres helped us develop safety protocols that protected clients without making them feel imprisoned.
Dr. Martinez provided therapeutic frameworks that guided our entire methodology. But the real validation came from our clients themselves. Women escaping domestic violence, elderly people recovering from financial elder abuse, families rebuilding after fraud and betrayal. They found in our center something that traditional victim services often missed. We addressed not just their immediate needs, but their fundamental right to create lives based on their own values and choices. On the 2-year anniversary of the fire, I hosted another dinner party in my rebuilt home. This time, the guest list included staff from the Advocacy Center, clients who'd become friends, and the ever-expanding network of people who'd joined my chosen family. As we sat around tables that now filled my entire living room and spilled onto the screened porch I'd added during the latest renovation, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought us together. A conspiracy designed to destroy me had instead revealed my capacity for survival, growth, and the creation of something meaningful from tragedy. Emma raised her glass for a toast. To Rachel, who showed us that family is something you build, not something you're born into, and that the strongest foundations are laid in the ashes of what came before. The applause that followed felt like vindication not just for my survival, but for every choice I'd made to prioritize authenticity over obligation, healing over revenge, and love that honored rather than controlled. My biological family had tried to erase me from existence, but the woman who'd emerged from their ashes was more powerful than anything they could have destroyed. Standing in my garden later that night, watching the stars emerge over Millbrook's quiet streets, I understood that some stories don't end with justice or closure or even healing. They end with transformation, with the recognition that survival is just the beginning of something larger and more beautiful than what came before. The fire had been meant to end my story, but instead it had simply cleared the ground for a better one to begin.
5 years have passed since that October night, and Millbrook has become something I never expected. Home, in the truest sense. The Advocacy Center now serves 3 counties, with satellite offices in Salem and Portland. We've helped over 400 families rebuild their lives after betrayal, fraud, and violence. Each success story validates the choice to transform my trauma into purpose. Last month, I received a letter from Ashley. She's been released on parole and claims she wants to make amends. I read it once and filed it away without responding. Some bridges, once burned completely, should remain ash. My energy belongs to the future I'm building, not the past that tried to destroy me. Emma recently announced her engagement to a social worker she met through our referral network. Watching her plan a wedding surrounded by people who celebrate her happiness reminds me that love, real love, amplifies rather than diminishes the people it touches. My chosen family continues to grow, not through blood or obligation, but through shared values and mutual respect. Tonight, as every night, I'm grateful for the fire that revealed who I truly am when everything false burns away.
Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.